Hello. I hope today finds you well. Last week we kicked off the video by describing our food pantry and the good work that it does here in the community. And before we get into the message, I'd like to spend a few moments talking about something else that happens in our building here at Northwood Christian Church. You may not know that we house several different organizations and entities. We have other churches that meet here in this shared space. We have yoga studios and art studios, and we have a preschool, and we have a school called Apogee School for the Gifted, which is the one I want to highlight today. Apogee School for the Gifted is a school that is for a child that, well, let's just say other modes and styles of teaching and education maybe aren't the right fit for them. The headmaster, David Bonner, uses a shoe as an analogy. He says if you ever shop for a shoe, you might find one that's just slightly too tight or the arc doesn't quite hit your foot right. And that may be fine for someone else, but when you're talking about education and your child, you really want the right fit. And so Apogee is a school for especially gifted, highly intelligent children who need a more direct educational plan, one that is honed for them individually. And so the teacher to student ratio is very small, and they are able to craft learning plans based around the ways that a child or that specific child actually learns. And so they're able to do far more than might be possible at other more traditional schools. And so I'd like to give Apogee School for the Gifted a plug here and check it out. Google their name, look up their website. And also just want to remind you, this is just one of the many different things that we are proud to house here at Northwood. And so if you would like to support Northwood and by extension supporting Apogee School for the Gifted, as we need to keep the building good and clean and put together for them and kept up nice in the parking lot and all of those things, you might consider giving a donation to Northwood Christian Church, as that donation will go towards the upkeep of this space and be a benefit to us all. And so I am including the information that you will need. You might give through the app Givelify, as I mentioned last week. Look it up, look up Northwood through that app, or you might contact us directly, and I will include the information that you'll need to contact us on the screen right now. So pause your screen and take it down. And then, without further ado, let us move on to today's message. Today's text for consideration is found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 through 28. And the story goes, Jesus left that place and went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Just then a Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all, and his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away, for she keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It is not fair to take children's food and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed instantly. Now, the first thing the preacher wants to do after a story like that is to somehow get Jesus off the hook. I mean, talking about giving a poor woman the cold shoulder, here she is crying for mercy, but he doesn't answer. It seems so unlike Jesus. So I want to find a motive for the initial silence that he met the woman's cries with in the first place. He doesn't answer it. It says that he remains silent. And I want to set him back in line with the Jesus that we meet in other passages. You know, the ones where he goes out of his way to engage a marginalized person, like that Samaritan woman we read about in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4. And there are many other stories besides where Jesus is chided for engaging marginalized persons and outcasts. But here, Jesus meets her cries for help with silence. And the disciples egg him on and push him to go still further, asking him to send her away because apparently her shouting at them is a nuisance. It's annoying, maybe. And then Jesus answers, but just when you think things are going to get better, here's where Jesus is going to go back into Jesus mode and say the kind and compassionate thing. He says something that only reinforces one major cultural boundary of his day. He says, I was sent only for the lost sheep of Israel. And then the opening line, of course, identifies the woman as a Canaanite, not one of the lost sheep of Israel. In other words, I didn't come here for you. Now, Canaanites weren't around in Jesus' day, but by then the word had become something like a shorthand for Gentile. So, people like you and me, people who aren't Jewish, as was Jesus, as was the disciples. And we often see ourselves cast in the character of disciples. We see ourselves in the disciples, but no, in these stories, if we were there, we would be firmly, most of us anyway, placed in the Gentile camp on the outside looking in to Jesus's community and the cultural assumptions. The divisions between the house of Israel and the various Gentile peoples were deeply entrenched in Jesus' day. Jesus is only saying out loud what everyone else has felt. Go away. You are not like me. You are not in my in-group, my tribe. I am here to help my own kin first and foremost, God and country. Or for some, country first, and then God if there's room. So now I'm getting nervous. This story has me on edge. This is not the Jesus that I have known. So hopefully he's going to let us down pretty easy here and we'll see what it was all for. But as you already know by now, the next verse gets even worse. She kneels down before him in a plaintive fashion. How humiliating. And she's pleading, Lord, help me. 3 words, a cry for help. And Jesus answers, it is not fair to take children's food and throw it to the dogs. Gulp. Yeah, he said that. So now my skin is crawling. I'm feeling very uneasy. Jesus is embodying the prejudices of his own day in this story, naming his own kind as his kin, and people like this woman, well, there's no getting around it. Dogs. I don't like this at all. But Jesus was human. Sure, uniquely human, for in Jesus we see humanity and divinity intertwined. But Jesus was human too, and so am I, and so are you. When I really think about it, I'm reminded of the times when my own culturally ingrained sensibilities kicked in and reinforced these barriers between myself and people I perceived not to be in my in-group. I'm thinking now of the people that I pass by sometimes strung out, acting erratically, somewhat, if not off-putting, sometimes scary, dressed poorly, smelly, in various stages of intoxication perhaps, or however the culture frames those as unclean and outside and not in. The cultural identifiers are there for those with the eyes to see it. Jesus was right to name the demons he encountered in Luke as legion, which means 2,000. For there are more than we can account. There's more than we can count. Addictions, hatred, greed, racism, exploitation, to name a few. And when these demons approach me, embodied in some poor individual, the thought might cross my mind, did I come for these? Are these the ones I am bound to help? Are these my kin? Should I engage? And I want every reason to meet their presence, or perhaps their voice crying for help, with silence if I can get around them. Or really at the end, I just want them to go away. I wish that they weren't. Which brings me back to this story, I find a litany of excuses to get me off the hook. Usually I say to myself that I've got enough to be worrying about. So do I ignore their pleas, like Jesus did here initially? Sure. Do I deflect with some pithy excuse? Absolutely. Jesus is meant to help us see the divine in humanity when they're like this. And usually I'm challenged by an elevated form of humanity that I meet in Jesus, a better way to be. But today, I see how Jesus' humanity is reflected back at me, and with a vengeance. The woman responds, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." You have to like this woman pushing back and arguing with Jesus. At this point, she's in good company, for all the great ones argued with God, didn't they? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Job, to name a few. So this catches Jesus' attention as well. But I should note that in the Greek, the word used for dog is in the diminutive form. So we're talking perhaps about a small dog or perhaps a puppy. So this might be an indicator that we should call attention back to where this story started, which the focus was on the little girl, the woman's daughter. In these conversations about what to do with those who perhaps accost us on the streets or those we have trouble seeing as our brother or a sister, we forget that in those communities, children are being raised. The focus amidst the tension must be ever drawn back to them. When we fail to address the needs of outsiders, we are forgetting their children as well. But I digress. The woman elevates this concept of dog and insists that it has the right to the crumbs at the very least. And then Jesus answers, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was instantly healed. Wow, what an abrupt and sudden turnaround. But I've seen it before. These are the actions of someone who acknowledges and faces a deep truth. We are all brothers and sisters, children of God. And when our brothers and sisters are overwhelmed and put under by any manifestation of evil, be it poverty, depression, racism, hatred, addiction, whatever, we must find some way to engage the brokenness and as fast as we are able, because not everybody has the time to wait around. And when you see it, when, as the Apostle Paul says, the scales fall from your eyes, when the scales fall from your eyes, immediate and abrupt and fast action becomes absolutely necessary. People's lives are on the line. The woman asked first for healing and then for crumbs. I think we can do better than crumbs. I also think that it's no accident that this story comes immediately after the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. It happened in the chapter before, where we read that the crumbs were in excess of 12 large baskets of leftovers. In other words, when we see the world through the lens of the gospel of Jesus, there is more than enough. When we see it through that lens, the right lens, more than enough food for the world, more than enough water for the world, more than enough compassion for humanity, more than enough love, for God is love and God is boundless. The journey that our hearts must take in relation to the people in this world is the journey Jesus took with this woman. He was first moved from silent, seeming indifference to a begrudging form of engagement, and then from a begrudging form of engagement to condescending conversation. But hey, at least now they're talking. Then, through the course of the interaction, Jesus broadens the scope of the gospel's mission that before was about the children of Israel, had been for centuries those people at the center of God's priorities. Now it's broadened, and Jesus says that the woman has great faith. This woman who is now moved from outsider to in, from Canaanite woman, dog, to sibling, to child of God, to sister. When he elevates her and names her faith grade, he puts her in the same league with the ancestral heroes of his faith. As I said, our hearts need to go on this journey, from exclusion to inclusion, from wall builders to repairers of the breach between us, from supporters of violent acts against our alleged enemies or de facto enemies, to peacemakers who forgive our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. We need to see that all persons are God's children, and therefore our kin, our brothers, our sisters, our partners in this creative realm. That more than crumbs are called for. We must find the eyes to see this. That all persons being God's children and our kin means that more than our crumbs are called for. The lens of the gospel helps us to see abundance out of scarcity. Our love for others must not be an afterthought, like the leftovers after a meal. Our love must be as bountiful as the table we set for ourselves. After all, aren't all invited to the table Jesus has prepared for us in our communions? Our very lives must come to reflect this. We must set for others tables as bountiful as the ones we wished were set for ourselves. And then dine with our brothers and our sisters who were before strangers, now dearly loved, not only by God, but by us.